Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. Thoroughbred. Book 1, A Horse Called Wonder. Chapter 6. Ashlyn hated leaving the fold the next morning to go to school, and she didn't even get a chance to talk to Linda until lunchtime because Linda had missed the bus that morning. The girls sat down at a table with Jennifer and Corey and another girl, Stacy, who Ashlyn didn't know very well. "She's the most gorgeous filly, a chestnut," Ashlyn told Linda as she unwrapped her sandwich. "But she's had such a hard time." Ashlyn described everything that had happened that weekend, including Clay's Townstead's inspection and what he said. "But she's better now," Linda asked worriedly. "She's stronger and eating. My parents think she's going to be okay, except she's going to be a lot slower than the other foals in coming along. She won't be able to go out in the paddock for a while." "I just love her, Linda. I don't care what Mr. Townsend thinks. You'll have to come over, maybe next Saturday? Then you can spend the whole day. Wonder will have to be pretty quiet until then anyway." "It's an awful lot of work taking care of a sick foal," Corey said. "Do you really want to do all that?" Ashlyn looked at her in amazement. "Sure, why not?" "I'd rather wait till they're grown up, so that I can ride them. That's the fun part." "I don't know how any of you can want to be anywhere near horses," Stacy said with a shiver. "I've been scared to death of them since one big old monster threw me off." "You should have gotten right back on," Jennifer told her. "Anyways, tell us about the Churchill Downs, Linda." "It was great," Linda said. "I had the most incredible time. One of our horses won his race, and one came in second, and I watched the Derby, of course. It was too bad about Townstead Victor only coming in second," she added to Ashlyn. "But it was a good race." "I heard Bill talking about it," Ashlyn agreed. "But I was so busy with Wonder I didn't get a chance to watch the race." After lunch, Linda and Ashlyn hurried down the hall together. "I guess you'll want to go straight home after school to be with Wonder," Linda said to Ashlyn. "We have a tennis match here after school today. I was going to ask you to come." "It's today?" Ashlyn said. "I'd really like to see it, but I'm so worried about Wonder." "Don't worry, we'll have another at-home match next week. You can come then." "Okay, it's a deal." All week, Ashlyn could think only about Wonder. Each day, the foal seemed to improve a little, but Ashlyn thought it might be her imagination. She had a horrible time concentrating in school and was afraid she'd flunk a math quiz on Friday. But as she got off the bus that afternoon and waved goodbye to Linda, she decided to worry about her math score on Monday. She rushed to Holly and Wonder's stall and as soon as she changed. "Happy birthday, Wonder! You're a week old today." Hearing Ashlyn's voice, Wonder trotted across the stall and nibbled and rubbed her head against Ashlyn's chest. Ashlyn bent over and gave the foal a warm hug. "I'm glad to see you too. And guess what? Dad decided you can go outside for the first time." Ashlyn's father had followed her to the stall. He leaned over the door and smiled. "By the way, Ashlyn, I picked up something for her at the store." He brought his hand from behind his back and gave Ashlyn a tiny halter. "We didn't have one small enough in the tack room. Why don't you put it on?" The filly perked up her ears and playfully butted Ashlyn as she carefully slipped the leather pieces over Wonder's small head and buckled the straps. "It's a little big, but you'll grow into it. It's great, Dad." Mr. Griffin had collected 2 lead shanks. "I'll take Holly, and you take the foal," he told Ashlyn. "Wonder's not ready to go out with the other foals yet, so we'll put them in a separate paddock. She's going to be a little shy at first. She's not used to being led, but she should follow Holly." Ashlyn clipped the shank to Wonder's new halter. Her father did the same with Holly. The mare snorted excitedly. She knew what the lead rope meant, and meant she was going outside. "Easy," Mr. Griffin soothed. "Just take it slow so Wonder can keep up." He led the mare out of the stall. Wonder whinnied frantically at seeing her mother leaving without her. "Don't worry, girl. We're going to. Come on." Ashlyn gave a gentle tug on the lead, but Wonder didn't need any encouragement to follow her dame. She came out of the stall as fast as her spindly legs would carry her, and almost ended up in a heap on the straw. Ashlyn tried not to laugh as she reached out and steadied the foal. Mr. Griffin kept a firm hand on Holly. The old mare pranced and whinnied as they stepped outside. But Wonder stopped dead in her tracks, small hoofs planted, just stared. "Come on," Ashlyn coaxed. "I know it seems strange to you now, but you're going to love the paddock." Still, the filly wouldn't budge. She just gazed around with frightened eyes. Her nostrils widened as she sniffed the air, her big ears flicking in all directions. Ashlyn's father continued leading Holly forward, but suddenly Holly realized her foal wasn't with her. She stopped and looked over her shoulder and gave an encouraging call. Wonder called back. Ashlyn knew Wonder desperately wanted to go to Holly's side, but she was terrified of all the strange sights and smells. Holly called again, and Ashlyn gently urged Wonder on. The filly looked nervously around, nostrils flared, and ears and tail flicking. Finally, she took several stiff-legged steps. "Good girl," Ashlyn praised. "See, it's not so bad. Let's go catch your mom." Thankfully, the paddock was close to the barn, and Ashlyn and her father soon had Holly and Wonder inside. When they unsnapped the lead shanks and freed the horses, Holly leaned over to nuzzle Wonder, then trotted off down the paddock, shaking her head with joy at being out of the barn. Wonder tried to follow, but it was impossible for her to keep up with Holly's long strides. She stumbled and fell head over heels, her legs flying in all directions. Ashlyn started to run to her, but Mr. Griffin laid a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, she'll be fine. Holly just has to work off a few oats. Then she'll settle down and come back for the foal." Wonder had already picked herself up, but as Holly cantered in a wide circle, kicking up her heels, the foal stood forlorn in the middle of the paddock, looking first to Holly, then to Ashlyn, uncertain what to do. "She's scared, Dad," Ashlyn said. "I can't just leave her there." "Wait." He pointed, and Ashlyn saw Holly had gotten her high spirits out of her system. She trotted back to Wonder, and the two nuzzled. "Stay and keep an eye on them for a while," Ashlyn's father said, "but I'm sure they'll be okay now." Ashlyn had no interest in going anywhere until she was sure Wonder was all right. She climbed up on the paddock railing as Holly began to graze. Wonder, now safe by her mother's side, seemed less frightened. She looked around curiously, but she wasn't sure enough of these new surroundings to leave Holly for even a second. From where Ashlyn sat, she could see the other mares and foals in a nearby paddock. The foals raced in circles around their dames. They were healthy and full of energy. Poor Wonder looked like a lost orphan in comparison. She was so much smaller and so wobbly on her legs. But she was alive, Ashlyn thought. And that was more than a lot of people on the farm had expected. The next morning, Ashlyn proudly showed Linda the foal. "What do you think?" Ashlyn asked as the girls leaned their arms against the paddock railing. "She's gorgeous," Linda exclaimed. "Just as pretty as you said. Isn't she? She's still not big enough to go in with the other mares and foals yet, but it's really doing her good to be outside in the fresh air." "I wish I had a foal," Linda sighed. "Well, she's not really mine, even if she feels like it. It's like the horses your father trains. But I've been thinking of how neat it would be if I could train her myself. And ride her when she's old enough. You know, like Brad Townsend does with his colt." "So that's what you've been daydreaming about." Ashlyn grinned. "It's a lot more fun than thinking about just dissecting a frog, or what x plus y equals." "I thought dissecting that frog was pretty gross too," Linda agreed. One of the exercise riders here is a girl," Ashlyn said. "Her name is Jilly. I've seen her ride, and she's good. April told me she wants to be a jockey. I'm going to learn to ride that well." "You're not thinking of becoming a jockey?" Linda exclaimed. "You didn't tell me." "Well, an exercise rider for a start. I've kind of been keeping it a secret. No one would let me exercise ride anyways, even though I'm as tall as some of the riders. What I've been thinking is if I can ride that well, then I'll be able to ride and train Wonder when she's old enough. Look, here they come." Holly and Wonder had seen Ashlyn and were trotting to the fence. Wonder still had a hard time keeping up, but she was trying, and that was the important thing. The foal stuck her head through the space between the railings and nudged Ashlyn playfully. "Hi there," Ashlyn smiled. "Hello to you too, Holly. Look what I've got. But you already know, don't you?" She reached in her pocket and got one of the carrots she always carried and fed it to Holly. "This is my friend Linda." Linda rubbed a hand over Wonder's colt. "She's so friendly." "That's probably because she spent so much time with people since she was born. She looks more and more like her father, Townsend Pride, every day. I think she's going to have a spirit, too, even if Mr. Townsend doesn't think much of her." "You'll fix that," Linda said. "I'm going to try." Ashlyn lovingly rubbed her hand over Wonder's head, then turned to Linda. "Do you want to go look at the rest of the farm now? Then we can come back, and you can help me bring Holly and Wonder in before you leave." "Sure, I'm dying to see the rest of the farm." "Bye, guys," Ashlyn called over her shoulder. "See you later." Ashlyn described everything as the girls walked around the farm. She pointed out the different paddocks and barns, the training stable, and rings. "This place is so big," Linda said when they reached the crest of the hill that overlooked the farm and had a bird's-eye view. "No wonder you always hear Townsend's name when it comes time for a big race. I guess he must be getting Townsend Victor ready for the Preakness in a couple of weeks." "Yeah," Ashlyn agreed, "and the Belmont after that. My father's always saying he wished he had one of the Townsend horses to train. I don't suppose that'll ever happen, since Townsend has his own trainer." "Mr. Maddock," Ashlyn said, "but he's away now with the horses that are racing this spring." Ashlyn didn't need to explain much as they walked through the training area. Linda had been around a training stable all her life and knew a lot more about it than Ashlyn did. But she was impressed with the stable and track. "My father would die for the setup," she said. "It must cost tons of money to keep up. Everything's so perfect." "I think Mr. Townsend has a lot." Later, when the girls walked back to Holly and Wonder's paddock, they saw a tall, dark-haired boy in jeans leaning over the fence, looking at the mare and foal. "Who's that?" Linda asked curiously. "One of the grooms?" No, Ashlyn said. It's Brad Townsend, the owner's son. I wonder what he's doing here. Brad turned and saw Ashlyn and Linda. Ashlyn felt uncomfortable, but if Brad was taking time to look at Holly and Wonder, maybe he wasn't as obnoxious as she thought. Hi, she said. Hi, Brad answered. I was just cruising around checking out all the foals. You're the one that's been taking care of this filly, aren't you? I forgot your name. Ashlyn Griffin. This is my friend, Linda March. Linda, Brad Townsend. Wonder's really coming along, isn't she? Ashlyn looked fondly at Wonder, who was trotting around beside Holly towards the paddock gate. Brad shrugged. I suppose, but I'll doubt she'll ever make it to the track. What do you mean? Ashlyn asked. She's a runt. Ashlyn bristled. She'll catch up. Brad lazily brushed his fingers through his hair. I wouldn't count on it. My father doesn't think much of her. From what he says, she'll be one of the horses that he sends to auction. Ashlyn felt the color drain from her face. No! Want to bet? I wouldn't waste my money. Brad turned and pointed to the paddock where the other mares and foals were grazing. There's the foal to keep an eye on. 3 foot. You can already see he's got good conformation. My father told me I can train him. He'll be a winner. And Wonder will too. Come on, Brad smirked. Be serious. It's your time if you want to waste it, but I can tell you haven't been around a training farm for long. That filly is definitely not a winner. See ya. He turned and sauntered off. Ashlyn swung around to Linda. He can't mean it, she said angrily. He's just trying to show off, pretend he knows so much about racing. Mr. Townsend won't sell Wonder. But Ashlyn felt a sick feeling of dread. Linda stared at Brad and shook her blonde curls vigorously. Don't pay any attention to him. He's being a jerk. Ashlyn wasn't reassured. Could Brad be right? Maybe his father had already decided Wonder should go. From what Ashlyn had seen of Mr. Townsend, she could believe it was possible. If they saw Wonder, I'll just die, Linda. How could they decide so soon? Linda asked. She's only a week old. I think he's just trying to be a big shot. But Ashlyn couldn't get Brad's words out of her mind, and that night she had a hard time sleeping. Caroline finally called over to her. Stop tossing and turning. You're making the bed squeak and keeping me awake. Sorry, Ashlyn whispered. For the rest of the week, it did nothing but rain, and that didn't improve Ashlyn's mood. It was too wet to leave the horses out, especially the foals, but they all needed exercise. All of the hands in the foaling barn wrapped themselves in slickers, and the mares and foals in light blankets, and took turns walking the horses. They walked the harried horses outside in the drive, but Ashlyn didn't want to take the risk with Wonder. She didn't want the foal getting wet and chilled, and her father and Bill Parks agreed. Instead, she walked Holly and Wonder up and down the long barn aisles. But even the air in the barn felt damp. Finally, the rain ended. The sun and fresh breeze dried up the soggy paddocks. Holly and Wonder seemed fine when Ashlyn put them out in their paddock in the morning. They both frisked across the grass, glad to be out of the barn. That day, Ashlyn stayed after school to watch Linda's tennis match. When she got home, she noticed Wonder was listless. She stayed by Holly's side, hanging her head. Ashlyn climbed over the fence and walked over. Wonder looked at Ashlyn with her usual affection and trust, but something wasn't right. Ashlyn hugged her. What's wrong? The filly gave a little grunt and coughed. Then Ashlyn noticed Wonder felt hot. Too hot. And her nose was running. Horses didn't get human colds, but they had their own cold-like viruses. Wonder was showing all the symptoms. Ashlyn ran to the paddock gate, collected Holly and Wonder's leads, and led them into the barn. Dad, she cried, come quick, I think Wonder's sick. Her father stuck his head out of his office at the end of the barn. What's wrong? Her nose is running, she's hot, and she's coughing. He hurried down the barn aisle. Ashlyn already had the mare and foal in the stall. Her father knelt beside Wonder. He shook his head. Keep her warm. Get a blanket over her. I'll call the vet. Ashlyn remembered Dr. James' warning about Wonder being susceptible to disease. She ran to the tack room and found a clean blanket. Back in the stall, she wrapped it around Wonder. The foal had dropped down into the bedding and curled up. Holly was nudging her, sensing something was wrong. In a moment, Ashlyn's father returned. "We're lucky. Dr. James is over in the training barn. He'll be right here." "She was fine this morning, wasn't she?" her father asked. "Yes, she was trotting around." "You caught it early, then." He rubbed his hand over Ashlyn's hair. "We'll see what we can do." "Dr. James says she was so small and weak." Because she was so small and weak, Ashlyn couldn't finish. "You just keep holding her and talking to her. She knows and trusts you, and that's the best medicine she could have right now." But her father looked concerned, and Ashlyn knew he was thinking of the virus that had swept through Eggerndale. A few minutes later, Dr. James appeared. He went right to the foal and lifted the blanket. Ashlyn scooted out of his way, clenching her cold hands together. The vet's examination seemed to take forever. "Influenza," he finally said. He looked up at Holly. "How's the mare?" "She seems fine." "As you know, it's highly contagious, but the filly is bound to be more susceptible than the mare. Better quarantine them both and keep an eye on the other horses. We don't want it spreading through the barn. I'm going to give her a shot to control the fever and any muscle stiffness. Keep her warm and dry and make sure she nurses. If we've caught it in time, there may not be any complications." "Do you think she'll be all right?" Ashlyn said, her voice trembling. "I say maybe she has a chance." After Dr. James left, Mr. Griffin readied the stall at the far end of the barn that was separate from the other stalls by a wall and a passageway. It was only used for contagious animals. When it was ready, Ashlyn brought Holly and Wonder over. Wonder didn't want to get up off the bedding and had to be coaxed to walk the distance. "I'll get April and Jessie to clean and disinfect the old stall," Mr. Griffin said. "We can't have this spreading. It's a good thing Holly and Wonder were in a separate paddock. I'll have them bring Holly's feed too. You stay here and keep the foal warm. Get her up and to nurse if you can. Otherwise, we'll have to force feed her." Ashlyn cuddled Wonder close. For the long hours that followed, she stayed by the foal's side. After all her work, she wondered if she was going to lose the foal. She managed to get Wonder up to eat once, but the filly had no appetite and soon collapsed back on the bedding. Wonder had grown several inches taller in the past 2 weeks, but she still seemed like a fragile bundle when Ashlyn laid down beside her to keep her warm. Her back was less than 2 feet long, and Ashlyn could easily encircle Wonder's rib cage with her arm. Ashlyn couldn't see the rest of the barn from the isolation stall, but from time to time she heard worried voices. Then the commotion of the other mares and foals being brought in. Jessie came by with Holly's feed and water. He looked at Wonder and shook his head. Ashlyn's parents were worried about another virus epidemic and spent the evening in the barn checking horses and disinfecting. They were so busy they hardly seemed to notice Ashlyn. Her mother finally stopped by and looked over the stall door. She had wrapped her blonde hair in a red bandana, but loose ends were slipping out, turning around her face, and she looked tired. "You all right?" she asked Ashlyn. "We wanted to watch the other foals. 2 of them have a slight fever. Run up to the house and get something to eat, then, when you can." "I will, Mom," Ashlyn said. She knew what her parents were going through. She'd already seen it once before in Eggerndale. And if 2 of the other foals were running fevers, it wasn't good. April came by and relieved her for a while. "How are the other horses?" Ashlyn asked. April shook her head. "Your Mom and Dad are with them. I'm not sure. We've been moving horses all night, trying to isolate the sick foals." She hesitated. "Is this the kind of thing that you had before?" Ashlyn cringed, then nodded. "Yes, but it's not really that bad yet." April groaned and shooed Ashlyn off. The hours after she'd eaten passed even more slowly for Ashlyn. For a while, Wonder seemed to grow worse instead of better. Ashlyn could hear voices from the rest of the barn, but she didn't know what was happening. That frightened her more. Was the virus spreading? Were other horses getting sick? Was it going to be Eggendale all over again? Finally, late in the evening, Ashlyn's parents and Bill Parks came by to check the foal. Ashlyn had gotten Wonder to nurse briefly once more, but after that the foal refused. They all conferred and decided to wait a while before taking further steps with Wonder. They had enough on their minds to try and keep the virus from spreading. Ashlyn gently stroked Wonder's coat, speaking soothingly to her. Once or twice the foal grunted in discomfort and tried to lift her head. I'm here, Wonder. So's your mom. We'll make you better. From time to time, Holly nickered and nuzzled her foal. She trusted Ashlyn and seemed to know that Ashlyn was doing her best for Wonder. Eventually, Holly lowered herself down on the bedding of the big stall and settled for the night. She laid with her head close to her foal and Ashlyn, keeping a gentle eye on them both. Somehow, she knew to keep her legs out of reach. We'll be all right. We'll all be all right, Ashlyn whispered. She laid one hand on Wonder's warm body, the other on Holly's neck, and leaned back against the side of the stall. Her eyes felt so heavy she couldn't sleep. Not tonight. She couldn't.